قل هذه سبيلي أدعو إلى الله على بصيرة أنا ومن اتبعني وسبحان الله وما أنا من المشركين.
So we return back to our lecture in which we are discussing this distinctive aspect of the fiqh of the Ahle-Hadith pertaining to this matter of siyam, fasting, which is sighting of the crescent, and that the madhab of the Ahle-Hadith in this matter is that the ikhtilaf al-matali', the difference in the horizon of the moon, of the crescent, is to be taken into consideration, and that every locality and land and region has its own sighting. We mentioned that the madhahib who have opposed the Ahlul Hadith in this matter, then they are the Hanafis and the Malikis and the Hanbalis. As far as the Hanafis, then Ibn al-Humam, who passed away in the year 861 after the Hijrah, in his book Fath al-Qadir, he says, وَإِذَا ثَبَتَ فِي مِصْرٍ لَزِمَ سَائِرَ النَّاسِ فَيَلْزَمْ أَهْلُ الْمَشْرِقِ بِرُؤْيَةِ أَهْلِ الْمَغْرِبِ فِي ظَاهِرِ الْمَذْهَبِ. That if the crescent, it is sighted in one land and locality and region, then it is binding upon all of the people in all of the other lands. He says to the point that if the crescent was sighted in the west, then it is binding upon the people in the lands of the east. That even if the crescent is sighted in the west after hours after the sun has set in the east, if it is sighted in the west, that this sighting is binding upon all of the lands, even those lands in the east, that they are to follow this sighting. And Ibn al-Abidin, who passed away in the year 1252 after the Hijrah, in his book Radd al-Muhtar al-Dur al-Mukhtar, when he mentions the statement of Ibn al-Humam, he says, وَهُوَ الْمُعْتَمَدُ عِنْدَنَا, that this is the position near us, near the Hanafis, in the Hanafi madhab, that the sighting of one land is binding upon the sighting of all of the remaining lands, meaning a global sighting. As far as the Malikis, then Abu al-Walid al-Baji, who passed away in the year 474 after the Hijrah, in his book Al-Muntaqa, Sharh al-Muwatta, the explanation of Muwatta Malik, Al-Muntaqa, he says, وَإِذَا رَأَى أَهْلُ الْبَصْرَةَ حِلَالَ رَمَضَانَ ثُمَّ بَلَغَ ذَلِكَ أَهْلُ الْكُوفَةِ وَالْمَدِينَةِ وَالْيَمَنِ فَالَّذِي رَوَاهُ ابن القاسم وابن وهب مالك في المجموعة لزمهم الصيام أو القضاء إن فات الأداء. He says that if the people of Basra, for example, the city of Basra in Iraq, if they were to sight the crescent of Ramadan, then it is binding upon the people in the city of Kufa and Medina and Yemen, that all of these other lands, it is binding upon them to follow the sighting of the crescent in any land. As an example, the land of Basra, the city of Basra. He says that to the point that Ibn al-Qasim, Ibn Wahab, from the foremost students of Imam Malik rahimahullah, they have narrated upon him that it is binding upon them to fast, and if they had missed the fast, if the news of this sighting, it did not reach them in time so that they could start the fasting of the month of Ramadan on time from Fajr of the first day of Ramadan, if it reached them after Fajr of the first day of Ramadan, if this news reached them, then it is upon them al-ada, it is upon them al-qada, it is upon them to make up this fast after the month of Ramadan. It is upon them to make up this fast after the month of Ramadan. As far as the Hanbali madhab, then Al-Mardawi, who passed away in the year 885 after the Hijrah, in his book Al-Insaf fi Ma'rifat al-Rajih min al-Khilaf, and all of these books that we have mentioned, such as the book Fath al-Qadir and Radd al-Muhtar in the Hanafi madhab, and the book Al-Muntaqa in the Maliki madhab, and here the book Al-Insaf in the Hanbali madhab, then these are foremost texts of these madhahib that the blind followers and those people who confine and restrict themselves and have fanatism towards this madhahib, they base their religion upon these texts in these madhahib. And these are the positions of the scholars of these madhahib that they have mentioned in this text. So Al-Mardawi in his book Al-Insaf, which is the foremost text of the Hanbali madhab, he says, وَإِذَا رَأَى الْهِلَالَ أَهْلُ بَلَدٍ لَزِمَ النَّاسِ كُلَّهُمْ الصَّوْمِ لا خلاف في لزوم الصوم على من رآه وأما من لم يره فإن كانت المطالع متفقة لزمهم الصوم أيضا وإن اختلفت المطالع فالصحيح من المذهب لزوم الصوم أيضا. He says that if the people of any land and region and country, if they sight the crescent of the month of Ramadan, it is binding upon all of the people of the remaining lands to fast according to that sighting. According to that sighting. He says that there is no difference of opinion near the Hanbalis that fasting is obligatory upon those people who have sighted the crescent from those lands. Then he says, as far as those lands in which the crescent has not been sighted, the people of those lands themselves, they could not sight the crescent, he says that if the matali', they were one, if the horizon of the moon, of the crescent, it was one between these two lands, it was a singular, same horizon, then it is binding upon the people of those land, of that land also, to fast according to the sighting of the people of the other land. And if the matale were to differ, if the horizons, they were varying and they had a difference between these two lands, then he says فَالصَّحِيحُ مِنَ الْمَذْهَبِ لُزُومُ الصَّوْمِ أَيْضًا. Then the position of the Hanbali madhab is that even with ikhtilaf al-matali', even with difference in the horizons of the crescent between two lands, it is necessary and binding upon the people of the other land who have not even sighted the crescent and not seen it, to follow the sighting of the other land, even with ikhtilaf al-matali', even with difference of horizons of the crescent between these two lands. And Al-Buhuti, who passed away in the year 1051 after the Hijrah, in his book Ar-Rawd al-Murbi', Sharh Zad al-Mustaqni', Ar-Rawd al-Murbi', which is also a fundamental text of the Hanbali madhab, he says, وَإِذَا رَآهُ أَهْلُ بَلَدٍ أي متى ثبتت رؤيته ببلد لزم الناس كلهم الصوم لقوله صلى الله عليه وسلم صوموا لرؤيته وأفطروا لرؤيته وهو خطاب للأمة كافة. He says that if the people of one land and region and country, they were to sight the crescent, then it is necessary and binding upon the people of all of the lands to follow that sighting and to fast. And the proof is the hadith of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, fast when you see the crescent and break your fast, meaning enter the month of Shawwal when you see the crescent. And this is a directive from Prophet Muhammad ﷺ to all of the Muslims. To all of the Muslims is a general directive from Prophet Muhammad ﷺ to all of the Muslims in all of the lands. And these statements of these madhahib, as we have just mentioned, the Hanafis and the Malikis and the Hanbalis, they are based on what we just preceded. Their proofs are the general ahadith that have come in this regard. And they say that these the directive of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, the addressing of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ in these ahadith is to all of the Muslims in all of the lands, and that they do not give any weight to ikhtilaf al-matali', the difference of the horizons of the crescent, and that it is not to be taken into consideration when sighting the crescent, and therefore the sighting of the crescent in any particular land and region and country, then it is binding upon all of the remaining lands and regions and countries. That is known as global sighting. And the madhab that has agreed with the position and the madhab of the Ahle-Hadith in this matter, as we mentioned, they are the Shafi'is. They're the Shafi'is who said that ikhtilaf al-matali', difference in the horizons of the crescent, is taken into consideration, and therefore every land and country, it has its own sighting. It has its own sighting. An-Nawawi, who passed in the year 676 after the Hijrah, in his book Al-Majmu' Sharh al-Muhazzab, which is a fundamental text of the Shafi'i madhab, he says, إِذَا رَوْا الْهِلَالِ فِي رَمَضَانِ فِي بَلَدٍ وَلَمْ يَرَوْهُ فِي غَيْرِهِ فَإِنْ تَقَارَبَ الْبُلْدَانِ فَحُكْمُهُمَا حُكْمُ بَلَدٍ وَاحِدٍ وَيَلْزَمْ أَهْلُ الْبَلَدِ الْآخَرِ الصَّوْمُ بِلَا خِلَافٍ وَإِنْ تَبَاعَدَ فَوَجْهَانْ مَشْهُورَانْ فِي الطَّرِيقَيْنِ أَصَحُّهُمَا لَا يَجِبُ الصَّوْمُ عَلَى أَهْلِ بَلَدِ الْأُخْرَى. He says that if the people of one particular land and country and region, they were to sight the crescent of Ramadan, and the people in another land and locality and country, they did not sight the crescent, if these two regions and countries and localities, they were close by, they were close next to one another, then they take the ruling of one locality and one region and one country, and it is binding upon the people of that land which did not sight the crescent to follow the crescent sighting of the neighbor land that is close to it in proximity, that is next to it, if these two lands were close to one another. But if they were far away from one another, if there was distance between those two lands, he says, then the Shafi'i scholars, they have differed in this matter into two positions. And the correct position near the Shafi'is is that it is not binding upon the people of the other land who have not sighted the crescent to follow the sighting of the faraway land, to follow the sighting of the faraway land. And he says also in his book, Sharh Sahih Muslim al-Minhaj, fi Sharh Sahih Muslim al-Hajjaj, الصحيح عند أصحابنا أن الرؤية لا تعم الناس بل تختص بمن قربه. That the sighting of the crescent, it is not, he says that the correct position and the position of the Shafi'is is that the sighting of the crescent, it is not something that is general for all of the people, that if the crescent is sighted in one land and country, it is binding upon the other lands and countries. Rather, it is specific to those people who are close to this sighting, those people who fall under the same matla, the same horizon, those lands and regions and countries that fall under the same horizon, then they are considered to be one land, and they follow the sighting of that land, and it is not binding upon those lands that fall under a different horizon, the faraway lands. And the proof of the Shafi'is is the hadith of Abdullah ibn Abbas radiyallahu anhuma that we have just preceded, and they have used this hadith, this khas specific hadith, as to that which specifies the generality in the remaining ahadith, as is the madhab and the position of the Ahlul-Hadith. Here we would like to mention that even though these are the official positions of these madhahib, the Hanafi and the Maliki and the Hanbali madhab, that ikhtilaf al-matali', difference in the horizons, it is not taken into consideration, and that the sighting of any land and country, it is binding upon all of the remaining lands and countries, a global sighting. Even though this is the official position of these mazahib, as has just preceded in the statements of the scholars of this mazhab, there have been scholars who are ascribed to this mazhab and who are counted as being from the scholars of this mazhab, who have opposed their mazhab in this matter, who have opposed their own mazhab or that which they are ascribed to in this matter. So they are scholars from the Hanafi and the Maliki and the Hanbali mazahib themselves who have opposed the official position of these mazahib, and they have agreed with the mazhab of the Ahle-Hadith, and they have followed the proofs of and the text of the Sunnah and the Hadith of Abdullah ibn Abbas radiallahu anhuma without distorting it, without making ta'wil of it in this matter, and have said with the position of the Ahle-Hadith. So for example, from the Hanafis, we have Fakhruddin al-Zayla'i. He passed away in the year 743 after the Hijrah. He has his well-known book, Tabyin al-Haqa'iq, Sharh Kanz al-Daqa'iq. Tabyin al-Haqa'iq, Sharh Kanz al-Daqa'iq, which is also a well-known text of the Hanafi mazhab. He says in this book, وَلَا عِبْرَةَ بِاخْتِلَافِ الْمَطَالِعِ إِذَا رَأَى الْهِلَالَ أَهْلُ بَلَدٍ وَلَمْ يَرَهُ أَهْلُ بَلْدَةٍ أُخْرَى يجب أن يصوموا برؤية أولئك كيفما كان، وأكثر المشايخ على أنه لا يعتبر، حتى إذا صام أهل بلدة 30 يوما وأهل بلدة أخرى 29 يوما يجب عليهم قضاء يوم. He says that the official position of my and our madhab, the Hanafi madhab, is that اختلاف المطالع, the difference in the horizon of the crescent, they are not to be given any consideration. So if the people of any locality and country, they were to sight the crescent, then it is obligatory upon the people of all and every other land and country and locality to fast and to follow that sighting. And he said to the point that the overwhelming majority of the Hanafi scholars, the scholars of his madhab, they have said that if a land, the people of a land and a country, they were to fast 30 days, and the people of another land and locality and country, they fasted only 29 days, and the news did not reach them of the sighting of the crescent, it is obligatory upon the people of the land that fasted 29 days to make up a day after the month of Ramadan, to make up a day following the sighting of the other land, to have one unified global sighting. Then Az-Zayla'i, he says, وَالْأَشْبَهِ أَنْ يُعْتَبَرْ لِأَنَّ كُلَّ قَوْمٍ مُخَاطَبُونَ بِمَا عِنْدَهُمْ وانفصال الهلال عن شعاع الشمس يختلف باختلاف الأقطار كما أن دخول الوقت وخروجه يختلف باختلاف الأقطار حتى إذا زالت الشمس في المشرق لا يلزم منه أن تزول في المغرب وكذا طلوع الفجر وغروب الشمس بل كلما تحركت الشمس درجة فتلك طلوع فجر لقوم وطلوع شمس لآخرين وغروب لبعض ونصف ليل لغيرهم. He says, after mentioning this official position and the position of the overwhelming majority of the Hanafis, he says, but the correct position is that اختلاف المطالع, difference, giving consideration to the differing horizons of the crescent, it is to be taken into consideration. It is to be taken into consideration. He said, because every people of every land, they are addressed regarding that which is in the land. These ahadith of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, these general ahadith, then they are, as we mentioned, addressing a specific people, the people of one particular land and locality and country. Then he says that this is something that is well known, that the sun, ikhtilaf al-matali of the sun, the difference of horizons of the sun, the setting and the rising of the sun, is taken into consideration from one land to the next. So, for example, the entrance of the time of obligatory prayer and the exit of the time of obligatory prayer, it differs from one land to the next. So, if the sun, it moves from its zenith and the time of Dhuhr enters in one land in the east, it does not mean that it has entered in another land in the west. And he says, similarly, is the time of Fajr, entering of Fajr, and the setting of the sun, the time of Maghrib. Rather, he says that every single angle and degree that the sun moves in the sky, then it is a different time for different lands. So it could be the entering of Fajr for one land. That same angle of the sun when it moves, it could be the entering of Fajr in one land, and it could be the rising of the sun in another land, and it could be the setting of the sun in another land, and it could be the time of midnight in another land. So here we find Az-Zayla'i from the Hanafis in this text of the Hanafi Mazhab, Tabyin al-Haqa'iq. He has cited and aided the position and the Mazhab of the Ahl-Hadith in opposition to his Mazhab. And this proof that he has mentioned is the same qiyas that we just mentioned. It's a proof of the Ahl-Hadith, a secondary proof of the Ahl-Hadith, in which they have the qiyas of ikhtilaf al-matali of the moon over the ikhtilaf al-matali of the sun. That is given consideration for the entrance of the times of prayer and other matters near all of the scholars with consensus. So similar to it is the moon. From the Malikis, we have Imam Al-Hafiz Ibn Abdul Barr, rahimahullah, who passed away in the year 463 after the Hijrah. He says in his great book, At-Tamheed, which is from the foundational and the greatest explanations of the book Muwatta Malik, Al-Muwatta of Imam Malik. He mentions the difference of scholars in this matter. So he mentions first those scholars who said that ikhtilaf al-matali is to be taken into consideration and that every land and country has its own sighting. Then he mentioned the second position, the position of those scholars who oppose them, that ikhtilaf al-matali is not to be given consideration and that the sighting of any land, it is binding upon other lands. Then he says, إلى القول الأول أذهب لأن فيه أثرا مرفوعا وهو حديث حسن تلزم به الحجة وهو قول صحاب كبير لا مخالف له من الصحابة. He says, after mentioning this, that I myself, I accept and I am upon the first position, which is the position of the Ahlul Hadith, those people who give ikhtilaf al-matali, that it is to be taken into consideration and every country and locality has its own sighting. So Imam Ibn Abdul Barr, he has opposed the official position of the Maliki Madhab. He says, I accept and I am upon the first position. And the proof, he says, is that because we have a clear, authentic hadith in this matter, pointing to the hadith of Abdullah ibn Abbas radiyallahu anhuma. He says it is an authentic, acceptable hadith, which is a hujjah, which is a proof in this matter of difference. It is a proof that is obligatory to be accepted and followed in this matter. And he says it is a hadith of a major sahabi, Abdullah ibn Abbas radiyallahu anhuma, and no one from the Sahaba opposed him in this matter. That it is not narrated from that anyone from the Sahaba, they opposed him in this matter. And as we just preceded, this is also proof of the Ahlul Hadith. And this is like an ijma', a consensus from the Sahaba in this matter, as nothing has been narrated in opposition to it. Then he says, Imam Ibn Abdul Barr, وَقَوْلُ طَائِفَةٍ مِّن فُقَهَاءِ التَّابِعِينَ وَمَعَ هَذَا إِنَّ النَّظَرَ يَدُلُّ عَلَيْهِ عِنْدِي لأن الناس لا يكلفون علم ما غاب عنهم في غير بلدهم ولو كلفوا ذلك لضاق عليهم. He says that, and this is also the position of a group from the great scholars of fiqh, the fuqaha of the tabi'een, that this is not just a consensus amongst the Sahaba, this is also the position of a group of the great scholars from the tabi'een, from the foremost jurists of the Muslim nation. And even though Imam Ibn Abdul Barr here in the statement has not mentioned these scholars, we'll mention them, that this position of the Ahl-Hadith, that ikhtilaf al-matali' is given consideration, and that every region and locality has its own citing, then this is a position of Imam Ikrimah, who is Mawla ibn Abbas. He is the freed slave of Abdullah ibn Abbas radiallahu anhuma, from the foremost scholars of the tabi'een, who passed away in the year 105 after the hijrah. And without a doubt, he took this from the hadith of his Mawla Abdullah ibn Abbas, and from his understanding and implementation of this hadith. From the scholars of the tabi'een is Al-Imam Al-Qasim ibn Muhammad ibn Abi Bakr as-Siddiq, rahimahullah, who passed away in the year 107 after the hijrah. From them is Imam Salim ibn Abdullah ibn Umar ibn al-Khattab, who passed away in the year 106 after the hijrah. All of them are major scholars of the tabi'een, from the foremost of the jurists, the fuqaha of the tabi'een of this ummah. Rather, they are considered to be from the fuqaha sab'a, the 7 foremost jurists of the tabi'een, who resided in the city of Medina. That from all of the tabi'een, these 7, they had precedence in knowledge of fiqh and jurisprudence. Fuqaha al-Madina sab'a. From them is Al-Qasim ibn Muhammad ibn Abi Bakr as-Siddiq, and in a position Salim ibn Abdullah ibn Umar. And this is also the position of the great jurist of the Muslims, Imam Ishaq ibn Rahuya, rahimahullah, who passed in the year 238 after the hijrah, who is from the foremost leading scholars in hadith and fiqh, and he combined in reaching the pinnacle in both hadith and his sciences and fiqh, the science of Islamic jurisprudence. And he had a madhab, a school of thought that was present, but due to political influences, his school of thought, it ceased to exist and it disappeared. But it is preserved, alhamdulillah, in the books of hadith. The scholars of hadith, such as Imam al-Tirmidhi in his book al-Jami', he mentions his positions from his madhab after the hadith that he narrates. So this position of the Ahl-Hadith, it is a position of these great scholars from the Salaf, consensus amongst the Sahaba, and these scholars from the Tabi'een and the Atba'u Tabi'een and other than them. Then Imam Ibn Abdul Barr, he says, even with this, he says that after mentioning the proofs from the Sunnah, from the Hadith of Abdullah ibn Abbas, and from the Ijma' of the Sahaba and the position of the Tabi'een, he says that with this, in addition to this, this is what the intellect gives proof to. That after mentioning the naqal, he supports it with the correct aqal. After mentioning the sahih naqal, the authentic naqal, al-naqal al-sahih, he supports it with al-aqal al-sahih, the correct intellect. He says that this is what the intellect gives proof to, because the people of any particular land and country and region, they have not been deemed responsible for that which they have no knowledge of from that which occurs in their lands. And if they were to be deemed responsible for that which occurs in other lands that they have no knowledge of, then it would cause great hardship to them. It would cause great hardship to them. And here he's pointing to another established fact, that the Islamic nation throughout his history in the last 1400 years or more, then this was something that was widely implemented and accepted in the Muslim lands, that every locality and country and nation, it had its own sighting. It had its own sighting. And these advancements in technologies of social media and phones and the internet, then it just occurred in the last 20, 25, 30 years. or at most half a century. And we are in the year 1445 after the Hijrah. So the overwhelming vast majority of this time, 1400 years or more, the Muslim nation, then it was upon this position, and there was no way that the people of one land, a faraway land, then they could be conveyed the sighting of another faraway land before they could start their fast in a proper, timely manner. In a proper, timely manner. And this is why it has not been deemed necessary and binding upon them to follow the sighting of a faraway land, because if it was necessary and binding upon them, it would cause great hardship to them, as Imam Ibn Abdul Barr has derived from his correct and sound intellect. Then he says, أرأيت لو رؤي بمكة أو بخراسان هلال رمضان أعواما بغير ما كان بالأندلس ثم ثبت ذلك بزمان عند أهل الأندلس أو عند بعضهم أو عند رجل واحد منهم أكان يجب عليه قضاء ذلك وهو قد صام برؤية وأفطر برؤية أو بكمال 30 يوما كما أمر ومن عمل بما يجب عليه مما أمر به فقد قضى الله عنه. وقول ابن عباس عندي صحيح في هذا الباب. He says that do you not see that if someone sees the crescent in the region of Mecca or in the region of Khorasan, which is divided today into several countries such as Iran and Afghanistan and Uzbekistan and other regions, that he says that if the crescent was sighted in its faraway lands of the east, in Mecca or in Khorasan, several years, and it was not sighted in Al-Andalus, the foremost western land in those times of the Muslims, Al-Andalus, which is present-day Spain, Al-Andalus, which is present-day Spain, in which Imam Ibn Abdul Barr resided, rahimahullah. He's from the foremost scholars of Al-Andalus. He says that if it was sighted all these years in the east and it was not sighted in the west, and then after several years, a person from the region of Andalus, he claims that the crescent was sighted all these years in the east, then will it become obligatory upon the people of Andalus to make up all those fasts in which they did not agree with the sighting in those faraway lands of the east, because he fasted with the sighting of his local land of Al-Andalus, or he broke the fast with the sighting of the local land of Al-Andalus, or he completed 30 days because he followed the order of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So he has this question from his correct sound intellect, that this does not agree with the intellect, a correct sound intellect. And he says that this is what the Prophet ﷺ ordered with. The Ahadith, the general Ahadith, that this is the understanding of Imam Ibn Abdul Barr also, that they are referring to a specific group of people, meaning the people of a particular land, a locality, country. If they were to see it, then it is upon the people of that land, all of them, to fast. If they see the crescent, to fast. And this is not binding upon people of another land. Then he says that the one who follows the order of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, and that which has been obligatory, made obligatory upon him by the order of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, then he has fulfilled his duty. He has fulfilled his responsibility, and he's not responsible for that which is foreign to him and not known to him, and it is alien to him. Then he concludes this great statement by saying, وَقَوْلِ ابْنُ عَبَّاسٍ عِنْدِي صَحِيحٌ فِي هَذَا الْبَابِ, that in this matter, the foremost and the strongest proof is the hadith of Abdullah ibn Abbas, that there is nothing that can give precedence in this matter over the hadith of Abdullah ibn Abbas radiyallahu anhuma. It is the unconditional proof in this matter. Rather, we will go further. Imam Ibn Abdul Barr, rahimahullah, he has relayed a ijma', a consensus of all of the scholars, that if two lands were extremely far away from one another, then every land has its own sighting. Every land and country has its own sighting, and this is something that Imam Ibn Abdul Barr has relayed a consensus amongst the scholars from. Imam Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, rahimahullah, he says in his great book Fathul Bari, which is the foremost and the most important and the greatest explanations of Sahih al-Bukhari, Fathul Bari, fi Sharh Sahih al-Bukhari, he says, إِذَا رُوِيَ بِبَلْدَةٍ لَزِمَ أَهْلَ بِلَادٍ كُلِّهَا وهو المشهور عند المالكية ولكن حكى ابن عبد البر الإجماع على خلافه وقال أجمعوا على أنه لا تراعى الرؤيا فيما بعد من البلاد كخراسان والأندلس. He says that if the crescent was sighted in any land from the lands, then it is binding upon all of the other lands. And he says this is the official position of the Maliki mazhab, as we have just preceded. But Imam Ibn Abdul Barr, rahimahullah, who is ascribed to the Maliki mazhab, he has opposed this position. And rather he has claimed ijma', consensus on that which opposes it. The other position, that every land has its own sighting. And Imam Ibn Abdul Barr, he says that the scholars have unified and united, ajma'u, that the crescent is to be sighted by every land that is extremely far from one another. Then he gives an example of this distance. What does he mean by extremely far from one another? He said, ka Khurasan wal Andalus, such as the distance between the eastern land of Khurasan, which is present-day Afghanistan, Iran, etc., and Al-Andalus, which is Spain. And this is something that we, the residents of Western countries in Europe, which is part of it was Andalus in those times, and that which is thousands of kilometers away has the ocean in North America, in Canada, and America, then this is something that applies to us, that the scholars have unified, ijma', consensus near them, that two faraway lands, such as the eastern land of Khurasan, and a faraway western land, such as Europe, Andalus, and that which comes after it's even farther away, then the scholars have unified that every single land has its own sighting, and they are not to rely and accept the sighting of that faraway land, of that extremely faraway land. And Imam Ibn Abdul Barr, rahimahullah, he is not the only one who has relayed this ijma', this consensus. From the scholars is Ibn Rushd, who passed away in the year 595 after the Hijrah. From the foremost scholars of the Malikis also, in his book Bidayatul Mujtahid wa Nihayatul Muqtasid, he says, وَأَجْمَعُوا أَنَّهُ لَا يُرَاعَى ذَلِكَ فِي الْبُلْدَانِ النَّائِيَةِ كَالْأَنْدَلُسِ وَالْحِجَازِ. That he says that the scholars have unified that the sighting of Al-Hijaz, of Mecca, Medina, present-day Saudi Arabia, it is not to be accepted for a faraway land such as Al-Andalus, Europe. So let alone that which comes after it by thousands of kilometers, such as North America. This is a matter of consensus, ijma', that extremely faraway lands, then they are not to accept and rely upon the sighting of those faraway lands. So we understand from these statements of these scholars, Imam Ibn Abdul Barr and Imam Ibn Rushd, that this difference of opinion that we just mentioned, that the scholars have differed into two positions, that every land has its own sighting, which is the position of the Ahle-Hadith, and the Shafi'is have followed them in this. And the second position is that the sighting of one land, it is binding for other lands, which is the position of the Hanafis and the Malikis and the Hanbalis. Then this matter and this difference is pertaining to lands that are close by. It's pertaining to lands that are close by. These scholars have differed as to if this close by lands, if they are to accept and it is binding upon them to follow the crescent, the sighting of that other close by land, or each land has its own sighting. But if they are extremely far away lands, such as the distance between Hijaz, Makkah, Medina, and the distance between Europe, then the scholars have unified and united, and there's no difference amongst them, that every land from these far away, extremely far away lands has its own sighting, and they're not to rely and accept and follow the sighting of that far away land, Returning back, we mentioned that from the scholars, from these who are ascribed to these madhahib, are those who themselves have opposed the official position of this madhab. We mentioned Az-Zayli from the Hanafis and Ibn Abdul Barr from the Malikis. Then from the Hanbalis, we will mention Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah, rahimahullah, who passed away in the year 728 after the Hijrah. Al-Mardawi, in his book Al-Insaf that we just mentioned, which is the foremost text of the Hanbali madhab, he says, الرؤية ببلد تلزم المكلفين كافة وقيل تلزم من قارب مطلعهم اختاره شيخنا يعني به الشيخ تقي الدين وقال في الفروع وقال شيخنا يعني به الشيخ تقي الدين تختلف المطالع باتفاق أهل المعرفة فإن اتفقت لزم الصوم وإلا فلا. He says that the position of the Hanbali madhab, the official position, is that if the crescent is sighted in any land, then it is binding upon other lands. It is binding upon the remaining lands as we have just preceded. Then he said that, and it is mentioned, the position of some of the scholars of the Hanbalis, that this is only pertaining to close by lands, those whose horizon is the same, that they follow that single sighting. And this is not binding upon far away lands where the horizons differ. He says that this is what our Sheikh and teacher, Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah, rahimahullah, Taqiyuddin, he has accepted as his position. And he says in his book Al-Furu' that, or Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah, he said that اختلاف المطالع, the difference in the horizons of the moon, this is a matter that is of no difference amongst all of the people of understanding. As we mentioned, none of the scholars, they have differed as to اختلاف المطالع is a reality, that the horizons of the moon, they differ from one land to another. He says that if the horizons are the same, the horizons of two lands are the same, then they are to follow the same sighting. It is obligatory upon them and binding upon them to fast and follow the same sighting. وَإِلَّا فَلَا, and if the matale are there's ikhtilaf, the horizons of the crescent, they are different between two lands, then it is not binding upon the people of that land to follow the sighting of another land. Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah also said in his book Majmu' al-Fatawa, pertaining to extremely far away lands, as we just mentioned, that this is a matter of consensus near the scholars, that this difference, it pertains to nearby lands, not extremely far away lands. He says regarding this, مسألة رؤية بعد البلاد رؤية لجميعها فيها اضطراب فإنه قد حكى ابن عبد البر الإجماع على أن الاختلاف فيما يمكن اتفاق المطالع فيه فأما ما كان مثل الأندلس وخراسان فلا خلاف أنه لا يعتبر. He says that the issue of sighting of the crescent, and if it is a regional sighting or a global sighting, if it is a sighting that is binding upon all of the lands, then he says this is a matter of difference. But Imam Ibn Abdul Barr, he has relayed ijma, consensus of the scholars, that this is not pertaining to extremely faraway lands. This is not pertaining to extremely faraway lands, such as Al-Andalus, Spain, Europe, and Khorasan, the region of Iran, Afghanistan, etc. He says, فَلَا خِلَافْ أَنَّهُ لَا يُعْتَبَرْ, that there's no difference amongst the scholars that the sighting of that extremely faraway land, it is to be accepted and followed, and it is binding upon that another faraway land, So here we will summarize with 3 matters that we can derive from these statements and these issues that we have just mentioned. The first is that the scholars have unified, and this is what pertains to us specifically, those residents in Europe and North America, that the scholars have unified. There's no difference amongst them, that these lands that are extremely far apart, such as the distance between Hijaz, Makkah, Medina, and Andalus, Spain, Europe, let alone that which comes after it, then the sighting of Al-Hijaz, it is not to be accepted, and it is not to be followed in those far away lands. Rather, there is consensus among the scholars that each of these faraway lands, it has its own sighting. The second matter we'll mention is that we derive from these statements of these scholars, such as Az-Zaylai and Ibn Abdul Barr and Ibn Taymiyyah, who are ascribed to these mazahib, the Hanbali, the Hanafi, and the Maliki, and the Hanbali mazhab, and they're considered imams of these mazahib, that they, in particular matters, they strove to reach the truth, and by the guidance of Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala, they reached the truth, and they followed unrestrictedly, unconditionally, the proofs and the texts of the Sunnah, and therefore they agreed with the Ahle-Hadith in these matters. And in this, they have 2 rewards: the reward of striving to reach the truth and to reach the truth. Their ijtihad, their striving, and them reaching the truth. And in it is proof of the methodology of the Ahle-Hadith, that if these scholars, they could look into the texts and the proofs of the Quran and the Sunnah, and to follow the proofs of the Quran and the Sunnah unconditionally, and oppose the mazhab that they are ascribed to, and they are considered to be a foremost scholar of this mazhab, then this is something that is totally acceptable and permissible. Rather, this is what is obligatory upon all of the Muslims, that they do not confine and restrict themselves and have fanatism, extremism towards one from these 4 mazahib, and to blindly follow the imams of these mazahib or other than them. Rather, upon every Muslim is to follow the path of these scholars, as they have opposed the same mazhab that they are ascribed to and that they claim to be the foremost scholars of. It is binding upon every Muslim to follow, just like them, unconditionally, the proofs and the text of the Quran and the Sunnah, and go with it wherever it leads them. The third matter we'll mention that we can derive from this is that these texts in these mazahib, that the blind followers and the extremists and fanatics of these mazahib, they study and they memorize and they restrict themselves to. Rather, they make it obligatory upon the Muslims who want to gain knowledge of fiqh, Islamic jurisprudence, to confine and restrict to these texts and to study the text of one mazhab, one after the other, and not to depart from this text. They make what is in this text obligatory and binding upon the Muslims to confine, restrict themselves to this mazhab and the text of this mazhab. Then we say to them that we can derive from this that in this same text that these people, these fanatics and these blind followers of this madhahib, they claim that they claim or they think that they're blindly following the imam of this madhab, then these same scholars, they have mentioned positions and statements in these texts that are in opposition to the official position of this madhab. They, in one matter or another matter or specific matters, they have followed the text of the Quran and the Sunnah, and they have been guided to the truth, and they have agreed with the madhab of the Ahle-Hadith, and they have mentioned this matter in these books of text that these blind followers memorize and confine and restrict themselves to, thinking that they are blindly following the imam of this madhab and the official position of this madhab. And this is a proof that they use, that it is not permissible for a Muslim to follow the text of the Quran and the Sunnah. Rather, it will lead him astray, and it will leave him without any foundations and any principles, and he will contradict himself and he will oppose him themselves. But they themselves, when they memorize and restrict themselves to these texts of these madhahib, then let them know that they themselves are memorizing and learning some of those positions that are in opposition to the mu'tamad of that madhab themselves, of the official position of that madhab themselves. So their claim is a false claim, and their proofs are based upon nothing, and they are the ones who are in contradiction. They are the ones, the blind followers of these madhahib and the fanatics, extremists of these madhahib, they are the ones in reality who are in contradiction, and not the Ahlul Hadith. Walhamdulillah, for verily there's no contradiction in the Quran and the Sunnah, and all of it is guidance and the truth. After this, we will mention that after mentioning the position of the four madhahib, and that the Hanafis and the Malikis and the Hanbalis have opposed the Ahlul Hadith in this matter, and the Shafi'is, they are the ones who have agreed with the Ahlul Hadith in this matter, and that they are scholars from the Hanafis and the Malikis and the Hanbalis, or those who are ascribed to them and considered to be foremost scholars of these madhahib, who themselves have, alhamdulillah, followed the proofs in this matter, and they have been led by the guidance of Allah to the correct position, the position of the Ahlul Hadith in this matter, that the blind followers and the extremist fanatics of these madhahib, the latter day extremist fanatics of these madhahib, then we find from them amazement in opposing their own madhab. We find from them that they have opposed their own madhab, and not because of following the proofs like these earlier scholars who strove to reach the truth and were guided to the truth by Allah. Rather, they have opposed their own madhab due to following their desires and their misguidance. They have opposed their own madhab due to following their desires and their misguidance. So, for example, we have the Malikis of present day times and of latter day times, those extremist fanatics and blind followers of the Maliki madhab, or so as they claim, that live in the countries of North America, such as Libya and Algeria and Tunis and Morocco, those who claim that they're blind followers of the Maliki madhab and that they confine, restrict themselves to the Maliki madhab, we find that they themselves oppose their madhab of global citing, that ikhtilaf al-matali is not to be taken into consideration, and that the citing of any land, it is binding upon other lands. They have opposed this due to their own desires and misguidance, because they do not want to follow the citing of the foremost country of the Muslims today, which is Saudi Arabia, because of their difference in matters of creed. These Malikis, of these countries, then they have opposed the same Imam that they claim falsely ascription to Imam Malik in matters of creed, and they have accepted the creed of Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari and al-Maturidi, and they have accepted Tasawwuf, Sufism, in opposition to the creed and mazhab of their own Imam Malik. And because Saudi Arabia, they are upon the Salafi creed, the creed of the Salaf, then they do not accept their citing, and they oppose their own mazhab due to their following of their desires and misguidance. Similarly, we find the Hanafis in the Indo-Pak subcontinent, the Deobandis and the Barelvis, the Ash'ari, Maturidis, the Sufis, they have opposed their own mazhab of global citing, that if the crescent is cited in any land, then it is binding upon other lands to follow it and abide by it. Rather, as we just mentioned, the Hanafis, such as Ibn al-Humam, has mentioned explicitly that the Hanafi mazhab is that even if the crescent is cited in a Western land, it is binding upon the people of the East to follow it. So the Hanafis of the Indo-Pak subcontinent, the Sufi, Ash'ari, Maturidis, Deobandis, Barelvis, then they do not follow and accept the citing of the crescent of Saudi Arabia, of Western land, even if it is in opposition to their mazhab, because of them following their desires and misguidance, because of their difference in matters of creed. Their difference in matters of creed. Rather, we should not go far away to the Indo-Pak subcontinent or to North America. Rather, we have countries that are neighbors to Saudi Arabia, that share hundreds and thousands of kilometers of border with Saudi Arabia, that oppose the citing of Saudi Arabia, even though they have the same matla', they have the same horizon. They have the same horizon. And this is only because of following their desires and misguidance, such as the country of Oman, which is upon the creed of the Ibadiyya, the Ibadi creed, which is an extreme sect of the Khawarij, and other neighboring countries that oppose Saudi Arabia in its citing, even though their matla', their horizon is wahid, is one, not because of this difference of opinion amongst the scholars and following the texts and the proofs of the Quran and the Sunnah, rather because of desires and misguidance, that they are in opposition to the Salafi creed. They're in opposition to the Salafi creed. So this is what the blind followers and the extremists and the fanatics of these mazahib of later times are upon. They claim that the Ahle-Hadith, they are the people who follow their desires, and they have no foundations and principles, and that following unrestrictedly the text of the Quran and the Sunnah, it leads one to misguidance and deviance. Rather, waliyadhu billah, they have said that it leads one to heresy, zandaqa and kufr and disbelief, and that they are the ones who are upon principles and upon foundations, and that they follow principles and foundations that have no contradiction, that causes them to follow the path of the scholars and to avoid contradictions. But here we find that they will throw away their mazhab and they will put it beneath their feet just because of the following of their desires and misguidance, giving no regard to their mazhab. So these people, these latter-day fanatics and extremists and blind followers of these mazahib, they're people of innovation and misguidance. They are false in their claim of following these mazahib. They have opposed the imams of the mazahib first and foremost, the same imams of these mazahib that they claim ascription to in matters of creed. they are upon another creed and belief than the imams of these mazahib, then they oppose the official position of this mazhab, not because of following the proofs such as Az-Zaylai and Ibn Abdul Barr and Ibn Taymiyyah before them, that they strove to reach the truth and they were guided to the truth by Allah Azza wa Jal by following the proofs unconditionally. No, rather they oppose them by way of their desires and misguidance. And we'll finish by saying that the position of these people of deviance and misguidance from these fanatics and extremists and blind followers of these mazahib is that they do not give any weight to ikhtilaf al-matali, if it is to be taken into consideration or not. And based upon that, if every country has its own sighting of the crescent, or the sighting of one country is binding upon another countries. Rather, their position and their methodology is that if the ties between us and our neighbor and another country were good, based on our creed and our politics, then the matale are united. Then there is ittihad if the countries, if us and another country, they are friendly, their politics and policies and their creed and other matters, they unite, then they say that we do not take ikhtilaf al-matali into consideration, and that the sighting of that country is also proof and binding upon us. And if the policies and the politics and the matters of creed and other matters, they are in difference between these two countries, even if they're next door neighbors sharing thousands of kilometers of border, then they will say that the matale, ikhtilaf al-matale, is taken into consideration. It's taken into consideration, and every country has its own sighting. So they are people of desires and misguidance that are not based upon anything, and they are the people who are people of contradiction, opposing their mazhab upon whims and desires. As far as the Ahl-Hadith, walhamdulillah, then they follow the proofs, the Quran and the Sunnah unrestrictedly, wherever it leads them, wherever it leads them. So their position, as we mentioned, is that they say ikhtilaf al-matali' is to be taken into consideration. The varying horizons of the moon and the crescent is taken into consideration, and every land and locality and country has its own sighting. And in this matter, the Ahl-Hadith, they have opposed the Hanbali scholars of Saudi Arabia. Even though the people of misguidance and deviation and desires from the followers and the fanatics and the extremists and the blind followers of these four madahib, from the Asharis and the Maturidis and the Sufis, they accuse the Ahlul Hadith of blindly following Saudi Arabia, in matters of religion. But the Ahlul Hadith, they have followed the proofs in this matter, and they have opposed the position of the Hanbali scholars of Saudi Arabia, even though they are the one upon the creed of the Salaf and Salafis, and they're the ones who have sided and aided and defended Saudi Arabia with all their might and power because of their unity in matters of creed, and they're both upon the creed of the Salaf. And on another hand, the Ahlul Hadith, they have opposed those scholars whom the Hanbali scholars, or some of them of Saudi Arabia, they accuse the Ahlul Hadith of blindly following. So on one hand, the Ahlul Hadith, they have opposed the Hanbali scholars of Saudi Arabia, who the people of deviation and misguidance from the Asharis and the Maturidis and the Sufis, from the blind followers of the four madahib, they accuse of blindly following Saudi Arabia. And on another hand, the Ahlul Hadith, they have opposed those same scholars who some of the Hanbali scholars of Saudi Arabia accuse the Ahlul Hadith of blindly following, such as Imam Ash-Shawkani. Some of the Hanbali scholars of Saudi Arabia, they say that the Ahl-Hadith, they are Shawkaniyun, or Shawkani al-Madhab, that they are blind followers of Imam al-Shawkani, Imam Muhammad ibn Ali al-Shawkani, who passed in the year 1250 after the Hijrah. But in this issue, the Ahlul Hadith, they have opposed Imam al-Shawkani in this matter, and they have followed the proofs. Imam al-Shawkani, he has sided with the Hanafis and the Malikis and the Hanbalis in this position, in this matter, and he has taken the position that ikhtilaf al-matali', it is not to be given consideration, and that if the crescent is cited in any locality and country, it is binding upon all localities and countries to follow that citing, meaning a global citing. Rather, in his great book, Nailul Awtar, he has refuted the hadith of Abdullah ibn Abbas, and he has mentioned tawilat, countless distortions of this hadith, that when one realizes and ponders upon the great status of this great Imam al-Shawkani, who revived the madhab of following the dalil unconditionally and not confining and restricting to any particular madhab from these four madhahib, that one is amazed at how Imam al-Shawkani in this particular matter has followed those Hanafis and Malikis and Hanbalis, and has made these distortions, countless distortions in the hadith of Abdullah ibn Abbas radiallahu anhuma, to support his position of global citing. So the Ahlul Hadith, alhamdulillah, they are people who unconditionally follow the texts, the proofs of the Quran and the Sunnah. They go with it wherever it leads them, and they do not give regard to whoever opposes them in this matter. They are people who have their manhaj and methodology that they do not leave for anything and for anyone. And also we can add that Imam al-Shawkani, in his great book Ad-Darari al-Madiyya, Ad-Durar al-Bahiyya, and then his explanation Ad-Darari al-Madiyya, Sharh Ad-Durar al-Bahiyya, which is a manual in text that he wrote upon the proofs of the Quran and the Sunnah, and upon the methodology of following the proofs of the Quran and the Sunnah, and not confining and restricting and having blind following any of these four mazahib. In this text also, he has aided and sided with the position that if the crescent is cited in one locality and country, it is binding upon all localities. And Imam Nawab Siddiq Hasan Khan, rahimahullah, from the foremost Imams of the Ahlul Hadith of the Indo-Pak subcontinent, who passed away in the year 1307 after the Hijrah, he also amazingly, in his explanation of Ad-Durar al-Bahiyya, Ar-Rawdatun Nadiyya, Sharh Ad-Durar al-Bahiyya, he has also sided with Imam al-Shawkani and aided this position. So the Ahlul Hadith, they do not blindly follow any one scholar from the scholars of the Muslims, and they accept the truth and the proofs of the Quran and the Sunnah and the position of the scholars who have aided and sided with the proofs of the Quran and Sunnah, whoever they are, no matter who they are. And they say that they have two rewards of striving to reach the truth and to reach the truth. And they do not accept opposition to the text of the Quran and the Sunnah from the scholars, whoever they are, even if they are Imam al-Shawkani, Imam Siddiq Hasan Khan, or other than them that they're accused of being followers of and blind followers of. Rather, they say that these are great scholars who strove to reach this truth, but they did not reach it, so they have one reward of striving to reach the truth, and their mistake and error is forgiven by Allah Azza wa Jal, has come in authentic hadith. And we will take a small break here, inshallah, and continue after the break with a third position that has been invented in our contemporary times in this matter of sighting of the crescent, which is the position of following the sighting of the country of Saudi Arabia. And we'll discuss this in detail, inshallah, after the break.
وذكر فإن الذكرى تنفع المؤمنين وما خلقت الجن والإنس إلا ليعبدون